In the world of business, there are stories that feel almost mythical. Stories of men and women who saw beyond numbers, beyond markets, and instead touched something intangible: desire, beauty, status, and the human longing for meaning. Among them stands one man, often called the Wolf in Cashmere, Bernard Arnault. Picture this: France, the late 1970s, factories closing, industries collapsing, and a once thriving textile world fading into decline. Amid that chaos, a quiet engineer from Roubaix saw not just a failing business, but the seed of a new empire. He wasn't merely buying companies, he was buying dreams, heritage, and culture itself. Today, his empire is called LVMH, the world's largest luxury group, spanning Louis Vuitton, Dior, Moët and Chandon, Tiffany & Co., and more. A constellation of names that embody not only wealth, but aspiration itself. Yet behind this empire lies a story of risk, struggle, and ruthless precision. Because Bernard Arnault was not born into luxury, did not inherit the silk of Paris or the glamour of the champs. He carved his path from steel and cement, with vision as his only currency. His empire began not with elegance, but with a crumbling textile company on the edge of bankruptcy. So the question lingers: how does a man take something dying and turn it into the heartbeat of global luxury? How does one engineer not just buildings, but brands, and not just profit, but cultural dominance? This is not just the story of wealth. It is the story of strategy, ambition, controversy, and vision. The story of how Bernard Arnault transformed failure into fortune and built LVMH into a modern empire that redefines what luxury means. And so we ask, is luxury about gold and silk? Or is it about the mind of the man who saw opportunity where the world saw ruin? Bernard Arnault was not born into the gilded salons of Paris, but into the industrial heart of Roubaix, a working-class city in northern France. His father owned a modest construction company, not the kind of empire that made headlines, but one that built with steel, cement, and discipline. From an early age, Arnault absorbed the value of precision and efficiency, watching the mechanics of business like a quiet apprentice to his father's craft. It was not luxury that shaped him, it was structure, engineering, and the belief that discipline could outlast chaos. As a student, Arnault pursued engineering at the prestigious École Polytechnique, where he was trained not in fashion or art, but in logic, mathematics, and systems. To many, this path seemed far removed from the glamour of haute couture, yet it would become the very foundation of his empire. The mindset of an engineer, applied to the unpredictable world of creativity. Arnault never saw fashion as frivolous. He saw it as a system of value, one that could be engineered, optimized, and scaled. The France of the 1970s was not a land of glamour. It was a nation in transition, facing industrial decline, shifting politics, and cultural unease. Factories closed, unemployment rose, and the textile sector, once a proud industry, began to crumble. In this bleak landscape, Bernard Arnault began his career in his father's construction firm, learning the language of contracts, negotiations, and survival. But behind his sharp exterior, there was a restless ambition. Arnault wanted more than buildings. He wanted a legacy. His first vision of that legacy came in the unlikeliest of places: a dying textile company called Boussac, which had fallen into bankruptcy. To most, it was a disaster. To Arnault, it was a door. Inside Boussac lay a neglected jewel, Christian Dior, a name that still carried whispers of Parisian elegance. The textile empire was worthless, but Dior was priceless. And it was here that Arnault's philosophy emerged. In every ruin, there is something timeless to be rescued. This was not just opportunism, it was vision. Arnault saw that while factories rusted and industries collapsed, human desire for beauty, status, and belonging would never fade. Luxury was not a necessity, was a statement, a signal of identity. And in a world where industries rise and fall, the art of desire is eternal. Arnault's mission became clear: to fuse the cold logic of business with the fragile poetry of luxury. But to pursue that vision, Arnault had to take risks. Convincing bankers, politicians, and skeptics was not easy. They saw a crumbling textile empire, saw Dior as the cornerstone of a new dynasty. He staked his career and reputation on the belief that luxury could be re-engineered not as mere fashion, but as an empire of aspiration. Few understood him at the time, but those who did would witness the birth of a new kind of businessman. Part engineer, part artist, part strategist. In these beginnings, we glimpse the paradox of Bernard Arnault, a man of numbers who understood the psychology of desire, an engineer who became the architect of dreams. His story did not start with champagne flutes and runway shows, but with the dust of construction sites and the collapse of industry. And it is precisely from that contrast, humble origins, and audacious vision that the LVMH empire would one day rise. Every great empire is built on uncertainty, and Bernard Arnault's rise was no exception. When he acquired the bankrupt textile group Boussac in 1984, he was stepping into a battlefield littered with debt, skepticism, and fading brands. To the public, it looked like an irrational gamble. Why save a sinking ship? But Arnault was not saving Boussac. He was extracting Dior from its ruins. Still, the path forward was not yet secure, and for a time, it seemed that even his vision might collapse under the weight of reality. The financial strain was immense. Arnault had convinced banks to lend him the capital needed for the acquisition, but repayment loomed like a shadow. Every move had to be calculated with surgical precision. The French media mocked him, calling his ambitions unrealistic, a young outsider with little understanding of luxury. Inside the crumbling factories of Boussac, workers feared for their jobs, and unions resisted his restructuring. What Arnault saw as reinvention, many saw as destruction. The early years were defined by painful decisions. Arnault shut down unprofitable divisions, sold off factories, and dismantled pieces of the once sprawling Boussac empire. Thousands lost their jobs. Critics labeled him cold, ruthless, even heartless. But Arnault believed there could be no rebirth without sacrifice. Dior, the crown jewel, had to be protected at all costs. Every tough decision was guided by a singular focus: survival of the brand. At times, Arnault stood on the brink of defeat. Investors doubted his methods, the press questioned his ethics, and politicians whispered about his aggression. There were moments when his empire in progress seemed like it could implode before it began. Yet in those very moments of doubt, Arnault revealed his greatest strength. Patience combined with relentless determination. Where others saw short-term failure, he kept his eyes fixed on long-term vision. The pivot came with Dior itself. Instead of treating it as just another fashion house, Arnault positioned Dior as the nucleus of a future conglomerate. He poured resources into revitalizing its image, modernizing its operations, and re-establishing its prestige. Dior became not just a profitable asset, but a proof of concept. If he could breathe life into this fallen star, he could do it again with others. This philosophy, buying undervalued brands, restructuring them, and then elevating them into icons, become the DNA of LVMH. But at the time, it was still untested. Arnault was gambling his future, his reputation, and his financial stability on a model that could have easily collapsed. Every pivot was a test of willpower. Cut deeper, focus sharper, dream bigger. In hindsight, these struggles defined him. The Bernard Arnault we know today, the man atop the luxury world, was forged in the fire of these early trials. Without the near failures, without the skepticism, there could be no empire. And it was precisely in this crucible of struggle that Arnault's true identity emerged, not just as a businessman, but as a strategist of survival, capable of turning near ruin into the first bricks of a global dynasty. The turning point came when Bernard Arnault proved that Christian Dior was not just a relic of post-war Paris, but a timeless symbol waiting to be reborn. By streamlining operations, investing in talent, and reimagining Dior's creative direction, he transformed it from a fading house into a global icon once more. The press that once dismissed him as ruthless now began to whisper another name: visionary. This success gave Arnault something more powerful than profit: credibility. For the first time, bankers, investors, and rivals began to see that his strategy wasn't reckless, but ingenious. Luxury was not dying, it was simply mismanaged. And under his leadership, Dior became proof that with discipline and vision, heritage brands could not only survive, but thrive. Momentum gathered quickly. Arnault understood something others did not. Luxury was not about following trends. It was about creating permanence. A Dior dress was not just fabric. It was a story, a symbol, an inheritance. By anchoring the brand in timelessness while refreshing its creative energy, he found the formula that would later define his empire: protect the brand's soul, but modernize its voice. With Dior restored, Arnault turned his eyes outward. In 1987, an extraordinary opportunity appeared: the merger of Louis Vuitton, legendary trunk maker, and Moët Hennessy, the champagne and cognac giant. The result was LVMH, a new luxury conglomerate, unlike anything the world had seen. For most, this merger was chaotic, filled with clashing egos and competing interests. For Arnault, it was the perfect battlefield. He maneuvered strategically, acquiring shares, outplaying rivals, and slowly gaining control of the group. By 1989, Arnault had secured majority ownership of LVMH, positioning himself as chairman and CEO. What began as a rescue of a failing textile firm had now become the foundation of the world's first true luxury empire. The boy from Roubaix was no longer the outsider. He was the architect of a new industry model. This was not just a business victory. It was a cultural shift. For the first time, luxury was no longer fragmented, scattered among independent houses. Under Arnault, it became centralized, managed with precision, and expanded with ambition. He fused the romance of heritage with the rigor of corporate discipline. The result was a machine of aspiration, one that could scale globally while maintaining the illusion of exclusivity. The breakthrough of Dior, followed by the conquest of LVMH, marked the moment when Bernard Arnault's dream began to crystallize into reality. He had proven that his philosophy worked: by heritage, protect its soul, expand its reach. What once looked like reckless ambition had now become momentum. And momentum in business is everything. It transforms skeptics into believers and vision into empire. With control of LVMH secured, Bernard Arnault now faced a new challenge: to transform a collection of luxury houses into a constellation, an empire of desire that spanned continents and categories. This was not about running a single brand. It was about orchestrating an entire ecosystem of heritage and aspiration. The risk was enormous. Too much expansion could dilute prestige. Too little, and competitors would rise. Arnault chose the bolder path. In the 1990s and 2000s, LVMH became a whirlwind of acquisitions. Arnault moved like a chess master, acquiring brands not only for their current value, but for their cultural symbolism: Celine, Givenchy, Sephora, Tag Heuer, Bulgari, Fendi, and eventually Tiffany & Co. Each addition expanded LVMH's empire across fashion, jewelry, cosmetics, watches, and beyond. Arnault was not buying products, it was buying timeless identities, each with its own mythology. Every acquisition was a risk. Luxury is fragile. A poorly managed brand can lose its aura overnight. But Arnault's genius lay in balancing autonomy with discipline. He allowed creative directors to guard the artistic soul of each house, while the corporate machine of LVMH provided capital, infrastructure, and global reach. It was a delicate dance between art and commerce, where too much control would suffocate creativity, but too little would risk chaos. The expansion carried financial dangers too. Billions of dollars were invested into reviving old houses and launching them into new markets. Critics warned of overreach. What if consumers lost interest? What if globalization diluted the exclusivity of luxury? But Arnault believed in a paradoxical truth: exclusivity can be scaled if managed with precision. By limiting access while expanding visibility, he turned scarcity into global desire. Perhaps the boldest move of all was Tiffany & Co. In 2020, after years of negotiation and a global pandemic threatening luxury sales, Arnault completed the $16 billion acquisition, the largest in luxury history. To many, it was reckless timing. To Arnault, it was opportunity. When the world doubted the future of luxury, he doubled down, and history vindicated him. As markets recovered, Tiffany flourished under LVMH, proving once again that fortune favors not just the bold, but the disciplined visionary. Yet not every move was perfect. Some acquisitions struggled, some creative directors clashed, and some markets resisted. The risk was always real. But Arnault's empire-building strategy was not measured in quarters. It was measured in decades. To him, temporary turbulence was the price of building permanence. Where others saw setbacks, he saw stepping stones toward a bigger vision. LVMH as the undisputed empire of global luxury. In these years of expansion, Arnault revealed the core of his philosophy. Risk is not to be feared, but to be engineered. Each acquisition, each gamble, was calculated like an architect designing a cathedral. Piece by piece, brand by brand, he built not just a company, but a fortress of identity. And in that fortress, luxury was no longer fragile, it was eternal. No empire rises without shadows. For Bernard Arnault, success brought not only admiration, but also fierce criticism. The man once praised as a visionary was often painted by detractors as ruthless, cold, and driven by an obsession with control. Behind the shimmering glass of luxury boutiques, the world saw whispers of layoffs, lawsuits, and public controversies that threatened to stain the empire he built. One of the most infamous chapters came from the hostile takeover battles of the late 1980s and 1990s. Arnault earned the nickname the Wolf in Kashmir. After outmaneuvering rivals with tactics, some called brilliant, others called brutal, his aggressive pursuit of control over LVMH was seen by critics as predatory, even merciless. The French press portrayed him as a capitalist machine, caring more for brands than for people. Yet Arnault himself never flinched. To him, these were not acts of cruelty, but of necessity in the game of empire building. The controversies did not end there. In later years, Arnault faced backlash over labor practices, tax strategies, and the ethics of luxury itself. When rumors spread that he sought Belgian citizenship in 2012, perceived as a move to avoid French wealth taxes, the public outcry was fierce. Protests erupted, and Arnault was vilified as unpatriotic, a billionaire fleeing the very nation that had given him his empire. Though he later withdrew the request, the episode revealed the fragile relationship between wealth, politics, and public trust. LVMH itself faced storms. Accusations of monopolistic behavior surfaced as smaller brands feared being crushed by the giant. Disputes with rival luxury groups like Kering became public spectacles, particularly in battles over creative talent and market dominance. Even within LVMH, tensions brewed. Creative directors, geniuses in their own right, often clashed with Arnault's disciplined corporate approach. Some resigned dramatically, others were dismissed in silence. The balance between art and business was never easy to maintain. Economic crises also tested the empire. The 2008 global financial collapse, and later the COVID-19 pandemic, threatened to shatter luxury consumption. Sales plummeted, boutiques closed, and critics predicted that perhaps finally the empire of desire had met its limit. Yet each time, Arnault adapted. During the pandemic, LVMH repurposed its perfume factories to produce hand sanitizer for hospitals, a move both humanitarian and strategic, softening criticism while reinforcing relevance. What stands out is Arnault's response to crises: silence, patience, and resilience. He rarely fought battles in the court of public opinion. Instead, he focused on endurance, letting results, not words, become his defense. Over time, LVMH would always emerge stronger, like a fortress weathering storms. Critics might rage, but the empire's growth spoke louder than the noise. And so, Arnault's controversies became part of his mythology. Was he ruthless? Yes. Was he calculated? Absolutely. But in the end, controversy did not destroy his empire, it defined it. For what is an empire, if not tested by fire? Arnault's legacy was forged not only in triumphs, but in the shadows of scandal, proving that greatness in business is never clean, but always contested. As the world entered the 21st century, the luxury industry faced a transformation unlike any it had seen before. No longer was prestige defined solely by Parisian runways or heritage boutiques. A new battlefield emerged: digital platforms, social media, and global e-commerce. For a company rooted in tradition, the risk was clear: adapt or become irrelevant. Bernard Arnault knew that the empire he built could not survive on history alone, had to reinvent itself for a generation raised online. LVMH embraced the digital age with caution but conviction. At first, luxury brands hesitated to sell online, fearing that exclusivity would vanish in the mass reach of the internet. But under Arnault's leadership, LVMH began experimenting. First with online platforms like Arshasif, then with strategic collaborations that blended streetwear with haute couture. The unlikely partnership between Louis Vuitton and Supreme in 2017 stunned the world, proving that LVMH could connect with millennials and Gen Z without losing its aura of exclusivity. Technology went deeper than marketing. Artificial intelligence, data analytics, and digital personalization became tools to understand consumer behavior. Arnault's empire began investing in tech-driven strategies, AI to predict trends, blockchain to authenticate products, and immersive experiences that fused luxury with innovation. A Dior dress could be sold in a boutique, but its story could be told to millions through digital storytelling. In this way, heritage met the algorithm. Yet transformation was not only technological, it was generational. Arnault, now one of the richest men on earth, began preparing his children to inherit the empire. Each of his 5 children took roles within LVMH's brands. Delphine at Dior, Antoine at Berluti and Communications, Alexander at Tiffany, Frederick at Tag Heuer, Jean at Louis Vuitton. The empire was no longer only Arnault's, it was becoming a dynasty. To the world, this sparked curiosity. Would LVMH remain strong after its architect was gone? Or would the heirs fracture under the weight of legacy? Relevance also required redefining luxury itself. In a world shifting towards sustainability and conscious consumption, LVMH faced criticism for excess and elitism. The response was subtle but deliberate, investing in eco-friendly practices, promoting artisanship, and reframing luxury as timeless rather than wasteful. Arnault understood that for the next generation, status alone was not enough. Values mattered. And so LVMH began branding itself not only as a symbol of wealth, but as a steward of culture and craftsmanship. Crisis continued to test the group, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Luxury sales dropped overnight, but LVMH rebounded faster than many predicted. Digital channels exploded, Chinese consumers returned, and new collaborations reignited excitement. Once again, Arnault proved that adaptability, not tradition, was the true core of luxury. In a world of constant disruption, LVMH became not just a company, but a living organism, evolving, resilient, untouchable. And so, in the modern era, LVMH stands as more than a business. It is a cultural empire, one that defines how the world perceives luxury. Guided by Bernard Arnault's relentless vision, powered by digital reinvention, and prepared for dynastic succession. The empire now poses a question not of survival, but of permanence. Is LVMH simply a corporation? Or is it the architecture of desire in the 21st century? Bernard Arnault's story is not just about building a business. It is about reimagining what business itself can be. From a small textile company in northern France to the throne of the world's largest luxury empire, his journey is a testament to vision, patience, and the power of reinvention. His path reminds us that greatness is never sudden. It is a series of calculated risks, relentless focus, and the courage to see opportunity where others see ruin. The first lesson is about seeing beyond the obvious. When Arnault acquired Christian Dior, the fashion house was fading, written off by many. Yet he saw not a fading star, but the gravitational center around which a galaxy of luxury could orbit. His genius was not in following trends, but in creating the stage upon which trends could live. For entrepreneurs, the lesson is clear. True visionaries do not compete within existing maps. They redraw the maps themselves. The second lesson is about discipline and control. Arnault's style has often been described as cold, precise, even ruthless. But beneath it lies a philosophy. Empires are not built on passion alone, but on structures that can endure. Luxury is fragile. It must be protected, curated, and scaled with care. In the age of startups chasing speed, Arnault's empire teaches the value of patience and stewardship. Sometimes the slowest growth is the most unshakable. The third lesson is about adaptability. Despite its heritage, LVMH is never trapped by the past. Whether through collaborations with streetwear, investments in digital platforms, or a pivot during global crises, Arnault proved that luxury must evolve without losing its soul. This is perhaps his greatest balancing act, holding tradition in one hand and innovation in the other. It is a reminder that legacy and progress are not enemies. They are partners in survival. The fourth lesson is the power of narrative. Luxury is not just about materials, it is about stories. A Louis Vuitton bag is not leather, it is Paris, history, craftsmanship, exclusivity. Arnault understood that humans do not buy products, they buy dreams. In this way, LVMH became not only a collection of brands, but a theater of desire. Entrepreneurs across industries can learn from this. The most powerful product is always the one that tells the most compelling story. Yet there is also a final reflection. What does it mean to succeed at this scale? Bernard Arnault today is one of the wealthiest men alive, but his empire raises questions beyond business. In a world divided by inequality, what is the role of luxury? Is it a fortress for the elite or a cultural treasury preserving artistry for generations? Perhaps the true measure of Arnault's legacy will not be his fortune, but how LVMH navigates these moral questions in the decades to come. And so, as the curtain falls on this story, we are left with a paradox. Bernard Arnault built an empire of exclusivity, yet his lessons are universal. He showed us that vision can outlast trends, that discipline can outbuild chaos, and that even in the world of silk, champagne, and diamonds, the foundations of greatness remain the same: imagination, strategy, and resilience. His empire may belong to luxury, but his philosophy belongs to anyone bold enough to dream. Bernard Arnault's empire reminds us of a timeless truth. Success is never built overnight, and it is never built alone. It rises on vision, endures through resilience, and thrives on the courage to reinvent what seems impossible. LVMH may be a story about luxury, but at its heart, it is a story about daring to dream bigger than circumstances. So, the question is, what empire are you building? It may not be made of champagne, leather, or diamonds, but your vision too holds the power to shape the future. If this journey into the world of Bernard Arnault and LVMH inspired you, imagine where your own journey could lead. Subscribe for more cinematic stories of business, vision, and leadership. And let's keep exploring the minds and empires that shape our world, because in the end, luxury fades, but the lessons remain.